Thank you for coming, for being here, for choosing our session or Jim's session over all the other ones that are happening at 2 p.m. Congrats, that's the right decision. It's really good to have you here, Jim. I'm really happy that you're here. I only say a few words and then Jim will take over and do the session, and then we will have some questions afterwards. I studied at Columbia like 10 years ago, and Jim was the assistant professor of the investigative program, and I learned a lot. A lot of what Jim told us over that year changed my view on how to talk to people. And back then I still thought I need to know everything about journalism, and I need to be great at data, and I need to be great at OSINT, and I need to be great at all of the techniques and all of the databases. And I was really happy that through Jim I was able to find a way to concentrate on something that I really like and I really think is often overseen in talking and teaching and thinking about journalism, and that is how to win trust and how to talk to people and how to convince people to help us find new stuff out. And so I'm just without anything else, just without too many words, Jim, please go ahead, and afterwards we will talk about this.
Thanks, Daniel. As Daniel mentioned, I have taught investigative reporting at the Columbia Journalism School for 16 years now. My co-teacher, Sheila Coronel, and I cover a wide range of investigative tactics, I'd say from A to Z. All the hot topics of modern journalism, data and public records and scraping. But myself, I have developed a single specialty, and it's not a hot topic. The other professors do not envy my specialty. It's an almost forgotten area of investigative reporting, the old school art of developing human sources. I want to discuss today a way of thinking about turning strangers into deep throats. It's a way to approach people that I believe results in deep reporting and happy reporters. I have specialized in this human side of investigation for a long time, as a reporter myself at Columbia and while running a private investigation firm. For many years, students and colleagues have brought me their gnarliest interview challenges. They've come to me and said, I really, really need this guy to talk to me. What's my best approach? We talk it through, they try the approach, and best of all, I often get to hear the result. What worked? What are the lessons? So today, I want to give you a kind of philosophy of developing sources, but I want you to know it's battle-tested. I admit my approach is provocative, controversial, as an alternative to kind of traditional ways of doing things. So I plan to speak for less than an hour, so there's time for questions and challenges and, for you to share your own perspectives on all this. Just to say, by asking you to consider this approach, I'm not saying there's a right way or a wrong way to do anything. So here we go. I thought I would organize my talk today around 5 elements of my approach that I hope you find helpful or, as I say, provocative. Then I'll come back with some details, and then we'll have time for discussion. Number 1, we set out to turn a stranger into a source. We are looking essentially for deep throats, by which I mean people who can not only provide information, but who can help our reporting, guiding us in how the wrongdoing works, identifying who might talk to us, strategizing where the hot documents might be, etc. Turning strangers into deep sources who can help like that is all about trust. And trust is built off the record. Get your quotes later. Number 2, when you approach potential sources, my advice is to stop asking questions. Tell them who you are, what led you to be fascinated by this story. Tell them how hard you're working to get to the bottom of it and get it right, and then stop talking and simply ask for their help, human to human. 3, as soon as you begin approaching people, the subject of your reporting is likely to hear you're coming. So gaming out which sources you can trust with your secret project wastes your time and gets you too paranoid to interview enough people. Report openly. Approach everyone. In fact, it probably makes sense to call the subject of your reporting early on. Then you can take a breath and knock on the doors of a maximum of potential sources in a positive frame of mind. Number 4, thinking about bad guys and good guys like in a cartoon poisons the process of developing sources. There are people caught up in a system that you want to expose, but you are in no way hostile to any individual. You are fascinated by them and the pressures that they're under. And 5, near the end of the reporting process, so-called confrontation interviews lead to shallow stories and nervous reporters. Instead of working yourself up to confront anyone, tell insiders what your reporting shows in the same spirit of genuine listening that you have shown sources all along the way. And remember that insiders can indict the system you want to expose. So try hard to make them into your sources as well. These 5 elements add up to an approach that I sometimes call walking in the sunshine, or if you want, human-to-human investigative reporting. Before I go into more detail on each of these elements, I wanted to repeat the beginning of the description of this session, which brought you all in here today, so you can see what I'm including and not including in my discussion today. Quote, interview techniques tend to focus on on-the-record conversations and the objective of obtaining useful quotes. When it comes to approaching strangers to become sources, call it investigative interviewing, the rules are completely different, unquote. That's how we lured you in. I repeat that to clarify that I'm not talking about interviewing for news or feature stories. I'm talking about approaching sources who have insider knowledge, who are probably reluctant to even speak to journalists. So my approach does not apply to every interview. And one last point before I dive back into my advice for developing sources. While this approach doesn't apply to every interview, I believe my so-called human-to-human approach applies to every journalist. Not just full-time investigative reporters working on big stories. I suspect there are people in this room who do local daily reporting, not particularly investigative reporting. You may not call yourself an investigative reporter, but you keep your eye out for scoops, you dig as deeply as you can within the limits of your job and your beat, and I hope my approach is useful to you too, not just the capital I investigative, capital R reporters. Now, let me go back to the first of my 5 points in a little more detail. My first point is certainly controversial, that the trust required to turn strangers into sources only happens off the record. Let's say the potential source is a former employee of the business that interests you or the government agency that interests you. In approaching that former employee, your aim in the first few email lines or first few seconds on the phone is to build human trust. So you may want to stop trying to hoover up quotes, in effect, look this other human being in the eye, and start to build what I would call a trust relationship by talking about yourself and your inquiry, your story. Some reporters like to approach potential sources and say nothing about confidentiality. They argue, why should I give away off the record if the source doesn't ask for it? Let me say nothing about confidentiality and maybe I'll end up with some quotes I can use. I'm sure that works for some reporters, but I just don't believe real sources start blabbing insider stories to strangers, us, on the record. And many non-journalists find on background to be both confusing and untrustworthy. And furthermore, it doesn't build trust to make people, in effect, beg you not to quote them. I believe silence on confidentiality may win you occasional quotes, but loses you real stories from inside the world that interests you, and that's a bad deal. Once off the record has been established, you must introduce yourself, not just formally, but personally. Until you open up a little about who you are and make some kind of human connection, the potential source, this other human, will withhold the information and help they could provide every time. My advice is not only to be personal in the first 60 seconds of an approach, but also to be passionate. In the informal setting of an off-the-record chat, you can say what brought you to this investigation, why you're fascinated by it. Being fascinated and a little passionate about getting to the bottom of something, these are secret ingredients, I believe, for connecting humanly. I sometimes advise young reporters to think hard about the first 60 seconds of speaking to a stranger, let's say a former employee they hope will help their reporting. I urge the reporters to give an account of themselves and their inquiry, their story, and then simply say, hey, now that you've heard a little bit about me and what I'm into, help! And then stop talking and just see what happens. One side note, I've been focusing on the human side of reporting for so long that I can see trends over the years. And one trend that will come as no surprise is that young reporters are increasingly inexperienced and uncomfortable with approaching human strangers. They're particularly challenged by having to build trust by introducing themselves and talking about themselves. That doesn't come easily for increasing numbers of people. It's sort of like me, the old guy, being uncomfortable with technology. And my young friends say, okay, boomer, get over it. And similarly, I tell my young friends, look, I'm sorry, but when you are a stranger to this former employee you really want to talk to you, on the other end of the phone or an email or a text, a stranger that, don't forget, doesn't know you or trust you, you must talk about yourself and how hard you're working to get to the bottom of something. I love that expression. Reporters can't just extract from sources. Successful reporter-source relationships are indeed relationships, where both do some talking. Each is interesting to the other, and so on. This also helps reporters stay in touch with sources, like Bob Woodward returning again and again to Deep Throat. Don't forget, we don't have to call him Deep Throat anymore now. Years later, we know that he was the #2 official in the FBI at the time, working on the same investigation that Bob Woodward was working on from a government point of view. His name was Mark Felt, so let's call out his name. Let's think about a perfect follow-up call between a reporter and, say, a former employee. The reporter would give some update like, hey, remember those company records I told you I was trying to get? Well, I got hold of them, but I don't really get what's going on in them. I need your help understanding them. Could we meet again? Now let's play it through to the end of the reporting. Once you've heard your off-the-record sources, from your off-the-record sources, what's really going on, now you know what happened, and that puts you in the driver's seat. You can do on-the-record interviews with higher-ups or others you now know were involved. Show them you know what really happened. Put them on the spot to respond for publication. Or go back to the off-the-record sources and see what they'll agree to put on the record. Giving away a lot of off-the-record in the beginning still gets you the quotes in the end, but they're the much deeper quotes that make great investigative stories. So we've discussed the first part of an approach to a potential source, where the goal is introducing yourself, building trust, asking for help. Now let's move on to the second part of an approach, getting this person to start talking. I have a theory about the rhythm of an investigative interview. I believe whatever rhythm you establish with your first handoff to the source to get them talking will remain the rhythm throughout the interview. So if you begin with a specific question that calls for a quick answer, hey, let's start with your experience, former employee. How did you get hired at the company? What year did you get hired at the company? The quick back and forth rhythm gets locked in under my theory, with the source waiting for your next question and the reporter, increasingly nervous, ticking off their question list. Instead of aiming for quick answers, I believe reporters can encourage great investigative interviews by creating conditions for sources to tell long stories. Stories, not answers. My advice is to start with simple, open-ended invitations, like, hey, could you start me at the beginning? Or, I'm hoping you could give me a briefing on XYZ. Your aim is for the source to respond in long stories, getting comfortable telling you what's really going on. When young journalists come to me for advice before an important interview, I can sometimes tell that they plan to kind of machine gun hyper-specific questions at this poor person. I at least urge them to delay firing all those little questions until the end of the interview, after long story rhythm has been established. Those specific questions are perfectly fine to tidy up the interview at the end. By the way, the opening question example I didn't like a moment ago, hey, former employee, let's start with your experience. When did you get hired at the company? Violates another of my rules. Never begin by asking a potential source about themselves. It sends a psychological signal that you're investigating them, and that tends to shut people down. When a reporter gets home from a great investigative interview, their notes should be filled with actual stories, crammed with names, dates, and amounts from inside the secret world that you're reporting on. You can tell you're having one of those awesome interviews when all you're saying to interrupt the source is, oh my God, then what happened? Let me say one more thing about my disrespect for questions. By the way, that's quite a sentence for a professor of interviewing, wouldn't you say? I believe reporters' questions are inherently weak because we always come from the outside. It's natural that we don't really understand the business or government agency or whatever world that we're entering, and we really don't know good questions to ask. For example, when you ask a hyper-specific question of a former insider, notice how often they argue with some term or phrase you've used. That's arguing that derails the storytelling you want. In great investigative interviews, the source gets comfortable enough to go into the back of their brains and dredge up stories, as I say, with names, dates, and amounts that go way beyond what the reporter would even have known to ask about. My third point was it's a waste of your time to try to control when the subject of the reporting hears that you're having a look at them. If you do your job, you're going to end up interviewing a ton of former employees and others, and they're going to hear about you soon enough. You can get big benefits, I believe, from an open approach to the reporting, including, I believe, benefits for the reporter's mental health. It's simply more fun to do something openly and without the headache of hiding what you're doing. By the way, I don't mean operational secrecy, protecting your files and so on, which of course is important. I only mean secrecy that you're working on something in the world you're doing it in. I believe an open approach also benefits how deeply the reporters can go. I sometimes say 50, not 3, meaning that you should identify and approach 50 former employees of something that interests you, not 3 former employees. While interviewing anything like 50 formers, you can't care who hears about what you're reporting. The cat is out of the bag, as it should be from my point of view. I'll go further. If you follow my approach and stop caring who hears about your reporting, you may as well just call up the subject of your reporting early on and say something like, I have become fascinated with XYZ about you. I'm having a look. I'm nowhere near ready to interview you, but I'll be back to you if I learn anything I'm likely to report. As I said before, reporters can find this approach relieves pressure on them as they knock on the doors of a maximum number of potential sources in a positive frame of mind. Dare I say, a sunshiny frame of mind. I know one reason to be concerned about when a subject hears your footsteps is the potential for cover-ups, the potential for the subjects of our reporting to shred documents, intimidate formers, etc. I'm sure there'll be comments about this from the room when I'm done talking. But my point of view is that cover-ups are most often good for a story, a plus factor. Corporate and government cover-ups point to and confirm that there is wrongdoing. Why else cover it up? And the cover-ups are often clumsy, with formers resenting the calls from their former employer, you keep your mouth shut, from someone who, after all, no longer has control over them. A cover-up can become part of the story. If I was pitching my editor on taking this open approach, I might even say, with enthusiasm in my voice, there's a possibility as we approach potential sources, the company might freak out and start shredding. Yippee! Of course, there are exceptions. I don't argue for this approach across the board. There are certainly situations that call on reporters to keep their reporting secret as long as possible. For example, when you're investigating a drug gang or doing something undercover. I'm just arguing that in the vast majority of cases, the vast majority of stories about business and government, you can consider the pros and cons of the traditionally secret approach or versus a more transparent approach. And I believe the choices will have profound effects on how deep your reporting goes and on your mental health while you're doing it. My fourth point was why I believe that it poisons the source development process to think of people caught up in wrongdoing as bad guys that you are somehow hostile to. Here's how I think about it. Investigative reporters begin every story on the outside of a high wall. On the other side of that wall is a sort of maze, a secret world, likely involving a particular business or government agency, that we know very little about at the beginning. Our first crack in the wall is usually a person who's sympathetic to our reporting, who represents victims or whatever. And then we go deeper and deeper into the maze of this secret world. We find on the other side interviewing experts, competitors, former employees, etc. Companies and government agencies are filled with people somewhat involved in wrongdoing, who see it without being involved in it, who are under pressure to follow orders, etc. There is almost no good, or pure bad in the world, in my opinion. And coming from the outside, us reporters don't know who's who anyway. By the way, the friendly person who helps you at the victim's NGO and laughs at your jokes, that's a person who is paid to spin you. They're not the cartoon good guy any more than the insiders are bad guys. So with all this not knowing who's who and not wanting to do cartoon level reporting, you can keep it simple and deal with everyone the same. Approach everyone, from the friendly person at the victim's nonprofit to the minister where the wrongs happened, with genuine curiosity, humility about what you know, and openness to surprises. From the beginning of the reporting process to the end, this is what attracts potential sources to want to help you. My fifth and last point is that so-called confrontation interviews lead to shallow stories and nervous reporters. Most investigative reporters are non-confrontational people. There are exceptions, I'm sure, in this very room. But I would venture to say that most reporters cringe from a confrontation interview. I say, cast them into the dustbin of history. With the same genuine open mind you've exhibited with others, you can explain to an insider, a wrongdoer, what your reporting shows without confronting them. Part of the confrontation style is to have no contact with the subject, to wait until the last minute, and then your first contact with the subject of the reporting is, I'm on deadline and I'm giving you a chance to tell your side. I'm sure there are sometimes good reasons to do this. I'm only arguing that there are other ways to consider. As your reporting digs deeper, you may see all sorts of reasons that insiders, wrongdoers, actually may be able to help you. These are humans under pressure, with rivalries and personal ambitions, and new management wanting to blame old management, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to giving an insider a chance to respond, a non-confrontational interview might go better than you think. They might be able to indict the system that you want to expose. So try hard to make those people your sources as well. So that's my approach, human-to-human investigative reporting. I'm hoping that you all want to share your own perspectives on all that. Thanks.
Thanks for summarizing the 10 months in New York and the very expensive tuition for free.
That was a $60,000.
Yeah, we can start with questions if you have some. Let's go ahead. I think it's small enough to just shout them to us, right? Christiana, I don't know, maybe you... for the recording, yeah. Okay. Then we will position one microphone in the middle, and you can come up to ask questions. Sorry.
Hi.
Hi, I have a question about approaching people who work, for example, at the government. Because if you approach them for the very first time, normally there would be a spokesperson or another person who also works in this office and join this very first conversation. So how to develop this in the style you described?
I think we have to do our best with how people receive us, and it will happen in many different ways. Sometimes when you approach a person outside their work, let's say, they want to have their lawyer there. That question comes up, and I always say, whatever makes you comfortable. If you approach a government person at the government agency, by the way, I would try to approach them at home or through their personal contact information. But if you have to do it through work and they have to have a public relations person there, I would I would accept that. I would accept it with, you know, whatever apparent enthusiasm you need to show. I just take the position that whatever makes you happy or whatever you've got to do. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for giving me some time, and let me tell you what I'm all about. Part of, I think, the advantage of this open approach is that it's ready for prime time. It's ready for the record. If the PR person wants to write up a memo about it for the boss of the agency, what they'll end up saying is, I guess they're doing some reporting on us, and they've got all sorts of you know, things that they want us to talk about. You know, it's kind of whatever turns you on. Source.
I also experienced situations where you start with like the press officer besides you, and then you try to be nice and interesting and talk about the subject and present how invested you are, and then later on you are able to talk like in more private with just the source because they are interested in talking further and not having the press officer around.
Yeah, by the way, a key word for me as I think about what a source might be going through, this person at the government agency, they're under an order that they are not allowed to at least have the initial interview with you without having the public relations person there. But to Daniel's point, maybe there's something else that happens later. And sometimes when I'm getting in touch with somebody privately after they've been with the public relations person, I say, look, I'm calling you on your private cell, or I'm knocking on your door at home, which you know, if you remember All the President's Men and Watergate, that was one of their tactics. They would just show up on people's doorsteps at dinner time. Is that I say, look, I'm not sure that your personal interests and the interests of your government agency are the same. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk. Remember, I'm giving away off the record like candy, so to speak. I wondered if we could just have an off the record where, you know, I might even point out some things where you might want to say something where the government agency might not want you to. So I thought I would just come see you on the side. So I think there are ways to deal with it.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you have any specific rules relating to how you contact the person, the source first. Do you have a specific strategy if you would first use an email to give them a chance to prepare for the phone call, so not to scare them, but otherwise it might happen that emails get ignored, so or is it better to directly approach or show up at their dinner table?
It's so fact specific. I could talk for an hour just in response to your excellent question. But let me start almost philosophically. I sometimes say to my students at Columbia, you know, we don't know how to fix a jet engine. We don't know how to cook a gourmet meal. We only know one thing, I believe, which is how to communicate. That's the role in life we've given ourselves. We're communicators. So I sometimes leave it to them. I put it back to them that generationally, there are vast differences between how people contact each other in different cultures. Again, vast differences. The range, we can all agree on what the range of possibilities are. There are only a half dozen of them, you know, phone call, text, email, showing up at their office, showing up at their house. I'm not sure there's another one. That's 6, I think. So it's within, your choices are within that range. So I sometimes leave it to the cultural and generational specifics of, and there are complexities on the other side too. Older people like to be communicated with in a different way, so the person on the other side of this interchange. So all of that, I think, ends up with judgment calls by reporters as to which of those 6 possible ways of contacting someone that you choose. But I think there are also ways that you can soften what you're doing so that the choice you make sometimes takes on more life. I sometimes show up on somebody's doorstep at their home at dinner time, And what I say is, I am so sorry to bother you. And I'm almost backing away while I'm on their doorstep. And it's like, I don't want to interrupt whatever you're doing this evening. I just wanted to look you in the eye, say that I am have become fascinated and I'm doing my best to dig into what I think is a really important question in your world. And I wonder if I could just give you my cell number, and if you could ever call me, I just wanted you to see that I'm a real person. And I'm leaving, and I leave. Now, I'm hoping they call me back and say, oh, come on, what was it you wanted to talk about? And then they just come in. Well, I'll take a minute. Let me turn off the TV. But you can soften things. You can soften an email. That you can soften a phone call. If a phone call feels too aggressive to you, and generationally, I know it does. You can say something similar. You can say, I'm sorry. There's another element here that I think is important. When people are under pressure, there's a scandal going on. There's headlines. There's blame that you assume is going on around their agency. There's something hot going on. You can say to somebody on their doorstep, or when you call their personal cell, you can say, look, I'm very happy to send you an email, but I was hoping we could talk completely off the record. I'm not trying to put you in the middle of anything. And I thought, given the way things work nowadays, by the time I send you an email and it's in the system over there at the government agency, I'm not sure it's even real anymore for me to offer you off the record. Because, there are email trails that the employer can look up later and say, so you were in touch with this reporter. And in this day and age, it's funny, you think of what I call doorstepping, from the Watergate era as being this, oh my God, no, we would never do that here. But in a way, the times we are in support that kind of tradecraft in a way that didn't exist back in Watergate.
You can always ask additional questions if you want to. I can.
No shouting, they have to come up. Do we have an extra mic or something?
Yeah, we have a mic over here, right.
It's hard to get out these.
Yeah, it's a barrier we should have thought about before. Make it as easy as possible for people to speak. Yeah, we could do that as well.
How about this one?
I would like to know, I'm a bit tall. I'd like to know whether this formula works all the time, because I think there are some people who don't accept you as a journalist or as a person, even with talking to them. For example, if you investigate right-wing extremist networks, for example, I had one thing, I tried to talk to someone and it worked, but I felt like I'm not really being honest because he would not accept my ideology, my background or whatever. So what do you do then? Is this ethically problematic, or is it already undercover or something like that?
I doubt a single person in this room will agree with me. But I really do try to leave ideology at the door. And I try to find some basis of being fascinated, not hostile, to the people that I'm reporting on. Part of that comes from having, 300 or more students come through our program, and each of them, Daniel can tell you, has to do a big piece of investigative reporting during that year. And in the fall, this is coming up for our 17th year, they'll have to choose what story they want to work on. And every year, a couple of them come in January or February and go, I really picked the wrong topic. It's so boring. I'm just not into it. And I try to say each time, because I'm interested in how this all happens, what led you to that topic? And in almost every case, it's some kind of, I think these people are evil. I think I'm just opposed to them. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't think that carries you through a piece of investigative reporting. I think if you're not fascinated with someone, if you just oppose them or hate them or something, I would pick a different topic. I know that doesn't take account of what happens when an editor, assigns you to something. I guess you have to suck it up. But I say to the students, in September, my strong advice is to find something to report on for this whole year that you are genuinely fascinated by, and that you can genuinely go to this right-winger on some basis. I know what you mean. I'm not trying to defend fascists or something, but some basis for you to go to them and be genuinely interested in what they're doing and what they're up to. I didn't say sympathetic. I just mean fascinated. Some aspect of it that you're genuinely interested in. And for me, that is often the pressures that people are under. How did they arrive at this moment? And what are the pressures that they're under? And you see where I think of this as kind of human to human. I'm not that into ideology. I'm into people. And if you can find some basis to make that what drives you into the story, I think it, as I say, makes for better reporting and happier reporters. Naive?
I always I didn't really introduce you as long and as well as I thought I should have. I recognized when you started talking that you were just diving in instead of saying a few words about yourself. I should have done that, but I don't want to do that now. But I wanted to point out one or two things because I think they were really interesting back then. So because you have been an investigator or a hired investigator for a lot of different government agencies with your firm, with your company. And I always found it interesting when you talked from the perspective of the source, because you have been a source for decades for journalists and other people. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about what makes you as a source who has been inside in specific situations comfortable with journalists. What was important for you to decide what kind of journalism do you talk to? Because as a private eye, people tend to call you up and ask you about your stuff. What are the journalists that you trust and you want to talk to, and why are they different to other ones?
Yeah, it's a good question. I am from time to time a source for investigative reporters, but in no case am I forced to speak to them. So it's up to me whether I help them or not. Maybe I could just tell one quick story. I was just going to edit one thing that mostly as a investigator for hire, I worked for businesses, not governments. But I wanted to tell you a story about where I did work for a government. I did a case that got a lot of attention for the parliament, the legislature of the state of Utah in the western U.S. And they hired me to investigate the Attorney General of the state of Utah. He had been accused of, soft corruption, kinds of conflict of interest kinds of things. And the legislature did not have investigators, so they hired me to do it. And when we were done, the Attorney General resigned. We issued a report, public report, and my client, the legislators, told me that if you get calls from reporters, you're permitted to talk and explain and tell them about our report. So I did. I got a variety of calls from reporters. I think the New York Times ended up quoting me somewhere. By the way, that was where we began off the record, and then he came back at some point, and we put one thing on the record. But I guess the first thing I would say is that these various reporters that called me took precisely the approach that I'm talking about. They would call and say, "Hey, this is who I am." In no case did I know them beforehand. "Hi, this is who I am." And I have gotten really into a thing, a sort of aspect of political contributions, whatever it is we were looking at, that your report kind of rang a bell with me, with some stuff that I'm doing, and I'm sort of intrigued by that, and I wondered if we could chat about that, and I'd be like, well, sure. What are you into? And I'm not being asked to say anything yet, so it's perfectly comfortable for me. I'm saying, well, so what bell did it ring? And the reporter starts to passionately go into what they're into and why this Utah thing fit into some other things that they were interested in. And eventually, I mean, at some point, they would say, dude, I do not need to quote you. Let's do this completely off the record. Be comfortable. And away we would go. We'd go off. An hour later, we'd hang up the phone, and each of us had learned something from the other. Then I was sitting at my desk one day, and my secretary came in and said, "It's Rolling Stone on the phone." And I was like, "Whoa, it's Rolling Stone." So I got on the phone in a perfectly good mood to speak to a Rolling Stone reporter. And this person says, "Hi, this is so-and-so at the Rolling Stone." I said, "Hey, how you doing?" He said, "Well, you did that Utah thing, right?" I said, "Yep." And he said, "Let me ask you something. How did you get hired for that?" There's like a dead silence. Now, I've known this reporter, I guess you could say, for under 10 seconds, and he's demanding an answer. He's questioning me. So I said, well, I'll tell you exactly what it felt like from the source point of view. It was as if he had slipped a noose around my neck and pulled it. I'm going to get an answer from you. Bunk. And I said, "Hey, I was just, taking a minute out of something because I wanted to talk to you, take your call. But could I just call you back another time?" And he goes, "Yeah, here's my number." I never called him back. That's the kind of different approach. And look, what people say about reporters. What the knock on us is that we're arrogant. That is the number one descriptor that non-journalists use about journalists. Arrogant. I think we have to work on our first impressions, not, confirming that.
I find it rather interesting to hear how much you work with or how is stress a go-to thing for you, like the pressure that people have within the system. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more how you deal with suspicion, because so far what I take from or hear from you is you try to create situations where suspicion doesn't occur, but I'm sure it does occur at some point. And do you give in, or how do you fight that?
Can you just be a little more, just imagine a situation where this would come up for me? I'm not sure I'm getting where you want me to go.
I mean, you have an intelligent opponent, and you come there as a journalist, and you basically have a tag around you that you're up there to get information, and just people might, as you said in the beginning, people might wonder that they are in the middle of your reporting, or that they are kind of the bad guy you're after. From my own experience, I know that suspicions can come up even an hour into a conversation, which has been going perfectly well just by asking the wrong question at the wrong time.
Yeah, I think you're giving me what I would call a softball question, in the sense that it sends me back to the core of what I've tried to convey today, which is that everybody is suspicious. This is a stranger. They have stranger danger. They don't trust you. That you're pointing out that they specifically don't trust you because you're a reporter, which I think is true a lot of the time. And so my top 10 list of what to do about that is to show that you're at the beginning of something, that you haven't made up your mind, that you're genuinely curious about things, you're humble about what you know and don't know, and maybe above all those things, that you're working hard to get to the bottom of something and to get it right. And it's not enough to say you're working hard, you have to show you're working hard. And I sometimes say in the first 60 seconds, if you give me a minute, former employee, whoever this is, if you give me a minute, I'd like to show you I'd like to tell you about some of the digging that I'm doing that I find really interesting. And I'm trying to do, I don't know, the deepest thing ever written about this. And the person says, sure, I'll give you a minute. I mean, you're not asking anything, right? You're just, sure. And then to say, well, I found this report that the Parliament in Slovakia did, and I've been reading through it, and it says things, it points me in the direction of this and that. There are also some things in it that I don't really understand, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to you. I'm hoping you can help me with a couple aspects of it. Well, and so I can summarize that approach with, I'm working hard, but I need your help. I probably say that 200 times in the course of the year at Columbia. I'm working hard, but I need your help. Because if you're not working hard, why should this insider, this former, why should they help you? And a good source doesn't like to drag a reporter from A to B to C. It's too boring. Sometimes young reporters think, oh, I know how to do it. This is how I always do it. I go in and I say, I don't know anything. I'm just starting out. Could you help me? It's like, no, not really. I mean, it sounds too boring. But if the reporter comes in and says, I got this report out of Slovakia Parliament, and there's some fascinating things in it, but there's also some things that I really don't get where they're coming from, and I might even bring the report with me, and I kind of scrunch it up and put yellow through some things and put some tabs on it. So I've sort of added value to it. It's not just something I picked up. And then I flipped up page 17 and I look at this yellow underlining. And the person says, well, what's going on? And I say, well, I don't get it. What? And that's an expression of, I'm working hard, but I need your help. And it draws the person in. And I'm not faking. I'm not pretending to be working hard but needing their help. I am working hard, and I do need their help.
I think we had a question in the back. We can just give you this.
No extra mics, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. We need your help.
I'm still contemplating your door approach to just walking up to the door and talk to people. I was wondering, although I see the point because you don't leave a record unless there is a camera or something, but like with an email and even a call these days, you might have logs in some way. But I'm wondering if there's like a mentality issue here, because I know a lot of people, at least in Germany, if you would just walk up to their door and knock or ring the bell, they would feel really threatened by your presence. Even if you would just say, I'm leaving and I just wanted to say hi. Just by the fact that you know their address or something, people are scared, basically. And they would certainly, at least many people that I know, they would never call you back, even if you are the nicest guy. Maybe because you're American. Maybe they would call you back, but not the German reporters. So what do you make of that? Is that just a cultural difference, or am I seeing it wrongly?
I think you're just leaving out one element that I think has to be present for it to work. And that is that the person is caught up in something. They're in a situation where there's controversy, blame, headlines, scandal, or something else with some pressure to it. I have done this kind of doorstepping all over the world, all over Europe, and I agree with you that there are cultural differences of various kinds. There are parts of the world where there are big guard dogs that can bite you all the time, and I mean, there's a lot of differences. America would be guns, I mean, you don't want to be a stranger on a dark night ringing any doorbells. So yeah, there are issues. I'm not trying to make light of those issues. But when a person is caught up in a situation, and let me take the opposite. If there's a professor who's an expert on the thing that interests you, and they've published things and so on. I am not advising you to show up at that professor's door, you know, in the absence of anything else, and just say, hey, you know, and they go, what the hell? You know, get me at work, what? No, but when somebody is caught up in something, I'm hearing your skepticism, and I appreciate it. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But I'm telling you, it works. Now, I should say one thing. I'm sure I should have said this earlier. No approach to this kind of interviewing, none, the secretive, the open, none, will you do any better than 1 out of 3. 2 out of 3 people will shut you down, slam their door, ghost you on email, etc. And that's one of the, and that's good. That's doing good. You know, if the crowd of people you need to interview are lawyers, you're going to do 1 out of 10 at best, et cetera, et cetera. If they're cops, it'll be 1 out of 20, right? I'm only trying to maximize, you know, what you get from people, and so on. So when you say that your friends would all slam the door, I would just make 2 arguments back. One, you know, I only want to approach the people you know when they're caught up in a scandal headline and blame at their work. Yeah.
And I would add, like, the softening of the approach, like, when I did that not many times, but when I doorstepped, I had a handwritten letter, and then if the person said, like, I can't talk to right now, I was really defensive, I'm just like, okay, I'll leave you this letter. If you want to read it later, that's fine. Call me if you want to. And I also, like, it doesn't work all the time, but, like, I think it's possible. That's what I would like to add.
At what time in the process would you recommend to ask for evidence or for more material? Because that's always the point when you have to show some distrust to your source, or like prove their story, and or ask for material they maybe are not even allowed to give you.
These are all great questions. Thank you. Every year at Columbia, you know, a student comes in and says, "Oh, I really blew it with that source I was telling you about." I did get to speak to them, and as soon as they mentioned, you know, the inspection process of the mines that I was interested in, I said, "Oh, when you left the mining agency, did you take any documents that I could see?" And the person just started backing away from me, like, "No, no." And then it sort of derailed the interview. And my advice is that trust, we've been talking about building trust. If we imagine it with a kind of visual with this hand, the trust is kind of going up like this over time. You know, this is a person that you hope to see a number of times and, you know, go back to or whatever. So meanwhile, trust is building, building, building. And the ask that you're doing, the asks that you're doing is also going up. So at first, you're just asking for a little bit of the person's time for them to hear you out. You know, that's not a big ask, but there's no trust, right? Little trust, little ask. Next, you might ask them to begin to talk, because a little bit of trust has been building up, and they'll do a little talking. You know, but as you go up, but you don't want to ask for something that the ask is up here, like, could you give me some documents? When the trust is just forming down here. You have to be way, way up in trust before you expect this other person to go to their file cabinet at their home and pull out this email, this incriminating email that they squirreled away when they left the company. And in fact, you know, it's much, much, much better if it's their idea to give you that document, not your ask for it. One way to get that to happen, and I think to build trust, is not to ask if they could give you a document, just ask about the document trail. Like, what documents exist? Like, you know, I might be able to file an information request for it or whatever, or when I talk to other people, I like to know what documents are called. So when you guys inspect a mine, do you do a document? I haven't asked them for the document. I said, do you do a document when you inspect a mine? And the guy goes, well, damn straight. Everything you do in government gets a document. And I said, well, what do you call that? He said, it's an N74. What are you kidding? It's, it's a mine inspection report N74. So, okay, that's good to know. And then who gets to see them? Who writes them? Well, the inspector writes them, the supervisor has them, et cetera, et cetera. And somewhere in that dialogue, and you're expressing appreciation and fascination with all that, the person says, well, there was a lot of fingers being pointed when I left the agency, and I might have squirreled a couple of those away. It's like, whoa. I wouldn't even ask then. I'd just say, whoa, maybe we could look at them. Could you, just tell me more. I really, really try not to ask for things that are going to get turned down. That's just a thing with me. I like to just let the moment hang there for a second. They're telling you about a document. That means they kind of want to show it to you. Maybe they don't want to give it to you. They might show it to you. But little steps, building trust, kind of fun for them.
Thank you so much. I hope we made a few more fun, more happy, more relaxed reporters today. That was really good. Thank you so much,
Good to see you
Jim.
all.
Yeah, and Jim will be around. He has another session, and he will be around at the conference as well. Yeah. Thanks. Danke fürs Zuhören.
Good to see you.